If this story finds you tonight, let me know where you're listening from. And if these voices from beneath the waves stay with you, subscribing is always appreciated. Now settle in. Close your eyes if you like. Because 2,000 years ago, on the northern coast of Egypt, a city as grand as Athens was sinking, and nobody wrote it down. Put your hand flat against your chest. Feel the warmth there. That heat is you, alive, breathing, pulling oxygen into blood that has been doing this work for a very long time. Now imagine that warmth leaving. Imagine that chest going cold. Imagine the skin turning to leather, then to dust, then to nothing at all. That is what happened to an entire city. Not a village. Not a camp of tents on a riverbank. A city with temples taller than 5-story buildings. A city with a harbor that could hold 60 warships at once. A city where priests burned incense in granite halls and traders argued over the price of Lebanese cedar. The salt water took it all. Here is the strange part. For more than 1,000 years, historians were not sure Heracleion was real. The name appeared in ancient texts. Herodotus mentioned it. Strabo described it. Diodorus Siculus referenced its great temple. But no one could find it. No ruins on the coast. No broken columns sticking out of the sand. No local memory of where it had been. The wind off the Mediterranean carries salt tonight. The same salt it carried then. Scholars debated. Some argued Heracleion was a literary invention, a port city conjured by Greek writers to give their heroes a place to land on Egyptian soil. Others thought it might be another name for Canopus, a nearby city that had also vanished. The confusion was understandable. Both cities were gone. Both had been important, and both had left almost nothing behind on dry land. Then, in the year 2000, a French underwater archaeologist named Frank Gaudio was searching the seabed of Abu Qir Bay. He was not looking for Heracleion. He was mapping the submerged landscape near the fort where Napoleon's fleet had been destroyed by the British in 1798. His sonar picked up something large beneath the silt. It was a wall, then another wall, then a road, then a canal, then the face of a god. A 5-meter-tall statue of Hapi, the Egyptian deity of the Nile flood, lying on its back in the mud, staring up through 6 meters of dark water at a sky it had not seen in 12 centuries. The water pressed against the stone face like a cold hand. Whether you drift off in the next few minutes or stay awake until the very last word, you are welcome here. This is not a quiz. There is nothing to memorize. You are simply lying in the dark, listening to a story about a place that also lies in the dark, covered in water, covered in silt, covered in time. We are in this together, you and I and everyone else listening tonight. Some of us are already asleep. Some of us are almost there. And that is exactly how it should be. The year is roughly 700 BCE. The place is the westernmost mouth of the Nile Delta, where the great river breaks apart into channels and pours itself into the sea. The land here is flat, almost impossibly flat. If you were standing on it, you would not be able to tell where the river ends and the marshland begins. The air smells of rotting reeds and fish guts, and the faint sweetness of lotus blossoms opening in the shallows. Heracleion is being built, not from scratch. People have lived in this waterlogged delta for centuries. But the city that will bear the name Heracleion, or Thonis as the Egyptians call it, is becoming something more than a fishing settlement. It is becoming a gate. The gate. The single mandatory port of entry for all Greek ships arriving in Egypt. Picture the geography. Egypt in this period controls the most productive farmland in the ancient world. The Nile floods every summer, depositing rich black silt across the valley floor. While Greek hillsides are dry and rocky, Egyptian fields produce surplus grain by the shipload. Greece needs that grain. Egypt needs Greek silver, olive oil, and wine. The trade relationship is not optional for either side. The The sound of wooden hulls scraping against stone quays fills the harbor from dawn to dusk. But the pharaohs are cautious. They do not want Greek merchants wandering freely through the delta. They do not want foreign ships sailing upriver to Memphis or Thebes. So they create a choke point. Every Greek vessel must stop at Heracleion first. Taxes are assessed. Cargo is inspected. Offerings are made to the gods. Only then, if the pharaoh's officials approve, may the goods be transferred to Egyptian barges and sent inland. This makes Heracleion extraordinarily rich. The city collects a percentage of every transaction. It feeds the priests who bless the voyages. It houses the customs officials who stamp the manifests. It shelters the sailors who wait for favorable winds. And it builds constantly, ambitiously, recklessly, on ground that was never meant to hold the weight of monuments. That detail matters. Remember it. The city sits on islands of compacted sand and clay within the river channels. The ground is soft. It is wet. It is made of sediment that the Nile has been depositing for millennia. Building a small house on this ground is feasible. Building a temple complex with granite columns imported from Aswan, 600 miles upstream, is an act of extraordinary confidence or extraordinary arrogance. History does not always distinguish between the two. Your own body knows the difference between solid ground and soft ground. You feel it in your ankles, your knees, the small muscles of your feet adjusting constantly. The people of Heracleion felt it too. They walked on ground that gave slightly under every step. They lived above water tables that rose and fell with the river. They built their lives on a foundation that was, quite literally, dissolving beneath them. The rain falls softly on the delta, so softly you could mistake it for silence. Canopus was Heracleon's neighbor, located a few kilometers to the east along the same stretch of coast. If Heracleion was the port of business, Canopus was the port of pleasure. Greek and Roman writers described it with a mixture of fascination and moral disapproval. It was a city of temples and festivals, yes, but also a city of wine, music, and what the ancient sources delicately called indulgence. The temple of Serapis at Canopus was famous across the Mediterranean. Pilgrims traveled from as far away as Rome and Carthage to sleep in its halls, hoping the god would visit them in dreams and cure their illnesses. The practice was called incubation. You lay down in a sacred space, closed your eyes, and waited for divine contact. It is not so different from what you're doing right now, lying in the dark, waiting for something to come to you. The incense in those temple halls would have smelled of myrrh and kifi, a complex Egyptian blend of honey, wine, raisins, juniper, and resin, burned at sunset to mark the transition from day to night. If you could smell it now, it would be sweet and heavy and slightly smoky, like something between church incense and warm fruit. Together, Heracleion and Canopus formed a pair. One city for commerce, one city for the soul. One city where you counted your coins, another where you forgot them. Both built on the same unstable delta. Both facing the same open sea. Both utterly confident that the ground beneath them would hold. The ships that arrived at Heracleion were called triremes and merchant galleys. The triremes were long and narrow, powered by 3 banks of oars, designed for speed and war. The merchant ships were wider, rounder, heavier, their hulls packed with amphorae of wine, sacks of grain, bundles of linen, and sometimes human cargo. Slavery was woven into the economy of every ancient port, and Heracleion was no exception. The wealth of the city was not clean. It never is. Beneath the keels of those ships, the harbor floor was covered in offerings. Sailors tossed coins, small figurines, and lead cursed tablets into the water as they entered port. These were prayers to the sea gods and river gods, requests for safe passage, revenge on rivals, or protection from storms. Thousands of these objects are still down there, scattered across the seabed like the scattered thoughts of a civilization that believed the water was listening. Maybe it was. At the heart of Heracleion stood the grand temple of Ammonius Cherub, a local form of the great god Ammonius. This was not a small shrine. The foundations stretched across an area larger than a modern football pitch. The columns were made of pink granite, each one quarried in the deep south of Egypt, loaded onto barges, and floated 600 miles down the Nile to this soggy piece of delta. The effort required was staggering. The faith required was absolute. Inside the temple, priests performed daily rituals that had been passed down through generations. They washed the statue of the god each morning. They dressed it in clean linen. They offered food, bread, beer, cuts of meat, and then consumed the offerings themselves after the god had taken the spiritual essence. The smell of bread baking in temple kitchens mixed with the salt air from the harbor. You have smelled bread baking. That smell has not changed in 3,000 years. Your nose recognizes the same molecules that drifted through the halls of Ammonius Cherub. The decree of Sais, a stele discovered in the ruins by Gaudio's team, confirmed something remarkable. It was a tax decree issued by Pharaoh Nectanebo in 380 BCE, ordering that 10% of all taxes collected on Greek imports at Heracleion be donated to the temple of the goddess Neith at Sais. This single stone told archaeologists three things. First, Heracleion was still functioning as a major port in the 4th century BCE. Second, the revenue was significant enough to fund temples in other cities. And third, the pharaohs were still using Heracleion as their customs checkpoint nearly 300 years after the city was first established. The chisel marks on that stele are still sharp. The hand that carved them has been gone for 24 centuries. But even as the decree of Sais was being carved, Heracleion was already in trouble. The evidence is in the soil, or rather, in what was once soil and is now seabed. Geological surveys conducted by Gaudio's team and researchers from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology reveal a pattern. The clay layers beneath the city show signs of liquefaction, a process where waterlogged sediment suddenly loses its structural integrity during an earthquake or a rapid change in water pressure. The ground does not just sink, it flows. It moves sideways. Buildings that were vertical become diagonal, then horizontal, then buried. Imagine standing on a beach when a wave pulls the sand out from under your feet. Now imagine that happening to an entire city, slowly, over decades, then suddenly, catastrophically, in a single night. The water remembers what the land has chosen to forget. By the 2nd century BCE, Heracleion was losing ground to Alexandria. The great city that Alexander had founded in 331 BCE was only 30 kilometers to the west, and it was built on bedrock. Limestone bedrock. Solid, stable, unyielding. Alexandria had a deeper harbor, a famous lighthouse, a library, and the backing of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Greek merchants no longer needed to stop at Heracleion. They could sail directly to Alexandria and do their business there. Heracleion did not die all at once. It sagged, it tilted, it flooded. The canals that once carried barges into the city center became too shallow, then too deep, as the land subsided unevenly. Buildings cracked. Foundations shifted. The people who could afford to leave did. The people who could not stayed and watched the water rise. Somewhere between the 8th century CE and the end of the 12th century, the last piece of Heracleion slipped below the surface of Abu Qir Bay. No one recorded the final moment. No poet wrote an elegy. The city simply ceased to be visible and within a few generations, it ceased to be remembered. And there it lay, in the dark, in the silt, in the silence, for century after century, while the world above changed beyond recognition, while Rome fell and Islam rose and the Crusaders came and went, while empires were born and buried, while the printing press was invented and the Americas were reached and the atom was split. All that time, the face of Happy lay on its back in the mud, staring upward through the murk, waiting. Consider what was lost beneath those waves. Not just stone and bronze and wood, not just architecture, but the daily texture of thousands of lives. The merchant who argued with a harbor official about the weight of his amphory. The child who played between the temple columns while her mother prayed. The old fisherman who knew from the color of the sunrise whether the catch would be good. None of their names survived. Not one. Their sandals wore grooves into the paving stones. Those grooves are still there, under the water. Canopus fared no better. The pleasure city, the healing city, the city of dreams and divine sleep. It went under too. The same geological forces that swallowed Heracleion took its neighbor. The same liquefaction. The same slow subsidence punctuated by sudden catastrophic drops. Archaeologists have found the remains of Canopus scattered across the bay floor just east of Heracleon's ruins. The two dead cities lie side by side in the silt like old companions sharing a grave. The fish swim through rooms where pilgrims once slept, hoping for visions from Serapis. The eels nest in jars that once held temple wine. The current moves through doorways that once framed the faces of priests. And all of it, every stone, every statue, every coin tossed into the harbor by a nervous sailor, all of it lay undiscovered while the modern world built itself above the waves. Fishermen in Abu Qir Bay cast their nets for centuries without knowing they were fishing over the rooftops of a civilization. Their anchors snagged on temple walls they could not see. Their hulls passed over streets where pharaohs had walked. Sometimes the things we lose do not vanish. They simply drop below the surface of our seeing. They wait in the dark, in the cold, in the pressure of water and time. And sometimes, rarely, beautifully, someone comes along with a sonar device and a question, and the dark gives back what it has been holding. The water is patient. It always is. The first thing Frank Gaudio's divers saw when they descended into Abu Qir Bay was nothing. Visibility near the bottom was less than 2 meters. The water was the color of weak tea, stained brown by centuries of Nile sediment pouring into the Mediterranean. They moved by touch as much as by sight, hands outstretched, fins kicking slowly, the sound of their own breathing loud inside their masks. Each exhale, a burst of bubbles rising to a surface they could no longer see. That sound, the rhythmic hiss and gurgle of a regulator, became the soundtrack of discovery. The seabed in Abu Qir Bay is not rock. It is mud. Soft, deep, anaerobic mud. The kind that preserves things precisely because it starves them of oxygen. That would have rotted in open air within a decade, survived for 1,000 years in this muck. Bronze that would have corroded to green powder remained intact, its inscriptions still legible. Even organic materials, rope fibers, wicker baskets, seeds, endured in conditions that on land would have destroyed them in a single wet season. Your body understands preservation instinctively. You store fat against famine. You scar over wounds. You build bone around fractures. The mud of Abu Qir Bay did the same thing for Heracleion. It sealed the city inside itself. Gaudio's team began their systematic survey in 1996, 4 years before they found the main city site. They used nuclear magnetic resonance magnetometry, a technology originally developed for detecting submarines. The device measures tiny distortions in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried objects, stone walls, iron anchors, bronze statues. Each one creates a signature that the magnetometer can read through meters of silt and water. The team towed the instrument back and forth across the bay in overlapping passes, building a map of what lay beneath. The map looked like a city. Streets appeared as linear anomalies. The harbor basin showed as a large rectangular void. The temple precinct registered as a dense cluster of high-intensity readings. All that granite, all that basalt, screaming silently through the mud. A gull passes overhead. Its shadow crosses the water. Beneath that shadow, a civilization sleeps. The first major artifact recovered was the stele bearing the decree of Nectanebo I. It was found lying face down in the silt near what had been the entrance to the Grand Temple. The stele is made of dark granodiorite, a stone so hard that carving it required tools tipped with dolerite or corundum. The inscription is bilingual, written in both hieroglyphics and Greek. It orders that a tax of 1/10 be levied on all Greek goods passing through the port of Thonis, and that the revenue be dedicated to the temple of Neith at Sais. This single stone answered a question that had nagged Egyptologists for generations. Thonis and Heracleion were not two different cities. They were the same city, known by its Egyptian name to Egyptians and by its Greek name to Greeks. Two names for one place. Two languages describing the same harbor, the same temple, the same streets now buried under the same mud. The chisel that carved those letters was held by a hand that ate bread, drank beer, and slept in a house that no longer exists above water. Near the stele, divers found a collection of bronze vessels, ritual containers used for temple ceremonies. The patina on their surfaces was a deep blue-green, the color of oxidized copper exposed to salt water over centuries. Some still contained residue. Chemical analysis of these residues revealed traces of animal fat, resin, and aromatic compounds consistent with the sacred oils described in Egyptian temple texts. The priests of Munias-Jareb had anointed their god with these oils. The molecules remained. Think about that. The actual chemical signature of a prayer, still detectable after 2 millennia. The ship graveyard was found in the harbor basin. 64 vessels in total. Some deliberate scuttlings designed to block enemy access to the port during times of conflict. Others simply abandoned and left to sink where they were moored. The wood was waterlogged but structurally intact. Dendrochronology, the science of dating wood by counting tree rings, placed the construction of several ships in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. The timber came from Lebanon, from the same cedar forest that had supplied shipbuilders since the time of the pharaoh Snefru, nearly 2,000 years earlier. Cedar smells clean and sharp. If you have ever opened a cedar chest or walked through a stand of old-growth conifers, you know the scent. It cuts through everything: salt, mud, decay. The ancient Egyptians valued it for exactly this reason. They used cedar resin in mummification because it resisted rot. They built ships from cedar because it resisted water. They burned cedar in temples because its smell was the smell of things that endure. The divers could not smell the cedar through their masks. But the wood remembered. Gold coins were scattered across the harbor floor like seeds thrown by a careless hand. Ptolemaic tetradrachms, Persian derricks, Athenian owls with their wide staring eyes. Each coin was a timestamp, a small metal witness to the century in which it had been dropped, lost, or offered to the sea. The earliest coins dated to the late 6th century BCE, the latest to the 2nd century CE. This gave archaeologists a span of nearly 700 years during which the harbor was active and money changed hands above the water that would eventually swallow everything. Your wallet, your phone, your bank account. These are the modern equivalents. Someday they too will be artifacts. Someday someone will hold them and wonder what you valued. Beyond the coins, the divers recovered jewelry. Small gold earrings in the shape of crescent moons. Carnelian beads strung on threads that had long since disintegrated, leaving the beads scattered across the silt like a broken constellation. A single ring, plain gold band, no inscription, found wedged between two paving stones in what had been a residential street. Someone lost that ring. Someone noticed it was gone. Someone looked for it. And then the water came, and the looking stopped. The weight of a gold ring in your palm is a specific kind of weight, heavier than you expect for something so small. That is density. Atoms packed close, electrons shared tight. The ring from the harbor floor feels exactly the same today as it did in the hand of whoever lost it. Gold does not change. It does not corrode, does not tarnish, does not decay. It is the most patient metal. It waited. Among the most significant discoveries were the ceremonial barks, model boats carved from wood and plated in gold leaf, placed in the temple precinct as offerings to the gods. These are not toys. They were theological instruments. In Egyptian religious practice, the gods traveled between temples and sacred boats, carried on the shoulders of priests during festivals. The model barks found at Heracleion were replicas of these divine vessels. Their presence confirmed that the grand temple of Munias-Jareb was not merely a local shrine, but a site of national religious importance. A place where the great festival processions of the Egyptian calendar were performed with full ceremonial gravity. The gold leaf on those barks still catches the diver's lights. A thin flash in the murk, a memory of holiness. Pottery tells its own story. The ceramic fragments recovered from Heracleon's harbor and residential areas represent a staggering diversity of origins. Amphorae from Athens, Rhodes, Corinth, Marseilles, Carthage, and a dozen smaller production centers around the Mediterranean. Each amphora had a distinctive shape and stamp, a kind of ancient branding system that told the buyer where the contents came from and who had made the vessel. Wine from one island tasted different from wine from another. Oil from one grove had a different character than oil from the grove across the valley. The amphorae were labels, and the harbor floor at Heracleion is a library of labels from every corner of the ancient trading world. Imagine a supermarket aisle, but underwater and 2,000 years old. Every jar a vote of confidence in a trade route. Every stamp a signature from a potter who shaped the clay with wet hands, set it in a kiln, and watched the fire do its slow work. So what killed Heracleion? The answer is not simple. It is not a single catastrophe, not a dramatic Hollywood moment of tidal waves and screaming crowds. The death of Heracleion is more like the death of a body that has been weakened by a dozen small illnesses before the final one takes it down. Think of it as a house built on a mattress. That is the analogy. Stay with it. Imagine you build a house on a mattress. At first, the mattress holds. The house is light, just a frame, a roof, some walls. The mattress compresses slightly, but remains stable. You add a second story. The mattress sinks a little more. You add stone foundations, heavy columns, a granite floor. The mattress groans. It deforms. The corners of the house begin to tilt in different directions because the mattress does not compress evenly. Some parts are thicker. Some parts are older and have lost their spring. The house is no longer level. Now add water. Let the mattress get wet. Not soaked all at once, just gradually, steadily, over years. The fibers of the mattress begin to break down. The internal structure loses cohesion. What was once a solid surface becomes a soft, unreliable mass that shifts under pressure. The house tilts further. Cracks appear in the walls. Doors no longer close properly. The floor slopes. The rain taps against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. Now shake the mattress. Just once. Just a tremor. A small earthquake. the kind that happens every few decades in a tectonically active region like the Eastern Mediterranean. The mattress lurches. The water inside it moves. And something called liquefaction occurs. The waterlogged material suddenly behaves like a liquid instead of solid. The house does not just sink, it drops. It plunges into the mattress as though the surface has opened up and swallowed it. Walls that were vertical are now at 45-degree angles. Floors that were flat are now slopes. And the water rushes in to fill every gap. That is what happened to Heracleion. The mattress was the Nile delta sediment, compacted clay and sand deposited over thousands of years by the annual flood. The house was the city itself, its temples, its warehouses, its harbor walls, its statues. The water was the Mediterranean, the Nile, and the groundwater that saturated every layer of the delta. And the shake was one of several seismic events that struck the region between the 2nd century BCE and the 8th century CE. Geologist Jean Daniel Stanley of the Smithsonian Institution studied sediment cores extracted from the seabed beneath Heracleon's ruins. Each core is a cylinder of compressed history, layer upon layer of material laid down over centuries. Reading a sediment core is like reading a book from bottom to top. The oldest layers are at the base. The youngest are at the surface. Stanley's cores told a story of incremental failure. The lowest layers showed stable, compacted clay, the original delta surface on which Heracleion was built. Above that, the clay became increasingly mixed with sand and shell fragments, indicating that seawater was intruding into what had once been a freshwater environment. Higher still, the layers showed evidence of rapid deposition, thick bands of jumbled material that suggested sudden collapse events, moments when large sections of the city dropped into the softened ground and were immediately buried. The weight of the evidence pressed down like the weight of water on a sinking roof. Between those collapsed layers, there were thin bands of fine silt, quiet periods when nothing dramatic happened, when the city simply sat in its slowly tilting state and life went on. People repaired walls. They propped up leaning columns with wooden braces. They built new structures on top of the rubble of old ones. Archaeologists found evidence of these repairs. Patches of newer stone set into older foundations. Wooden beams jammed into gaps where walls had separated. The people of Heracleion were not passive victims. They fought back against the sinking. They adapted. They improvised. But the mattress kept getting wetter, and the house kept getting heavier. The rise in sea level played its part too. The Mediterranean has not remained at a constant height over the past 3,000 years. During the Roman warm period, from roughly 250 BCE to 400 CE, sea levels were slightly lower than today. But localized subsidence, the sinking of the land itself, more than compensated. The delta was compacting under its own weight. The Nile was shifting its channels, removing sediment from some areas and depositing it in others. The combined effect was that Heracleion was sinking relative to the sea surface at a rate of roughly 1 centimeter per year. 1 centimeter per year does not sound like much. It sounds like nothing. But over a century, it is a meter. Over 3 centuries, it is 3 meters. Over the lifetime of the city, roughly 1,000 years of occupation, the cumulative subsidence was between 6 and 8 meters. The city that had once stood several meters above sea level was now several meters below it. Your fingernail grows at roughly the same rate. Slowly, invisibly, relentlessly. The final blow, or rather, the final series of blows, came from earthquakes. The Eastern Mediterranean sits at the intersection of the African, Eurasian, and Anatolian tectonic plates. Seismic events are not rare here. They are routine. Historical records document major earthquakes in the region in 365 CE, when a massive tsunami devastated the coast of Alexandria. Another struck in the 8th century. The geological evidence in the sediment cores matches these dates. The thickest collapse layers correspond to periods of known seismic activity. Each earthquake triggered liquefaction in the already saturated delta sediment. Each liquefaction event dropped the city further, and each drop brought the sea closer, not as a dramatic wave, but as a slow, cold, permanent flooding. Water that came and did not go back out. Basements filled. Ground floors became underwater rooms. Second floors became ground floors. And then those flooded too. The process was not uniform across the city. Some districts sank faster than others, depending on the thickness and composition of the sediment beneath them. The temple precinct, built on the heaviest foundations, sank earliest and deepest. The lighter residential areas on the city's periphery held out longer. This created a surreal landscape during the centuries of decline. A city where the sacred center was already underwater, while the outer neighborhoods were still inhabited. Imagine walking to the market through streets that sloped downward into the sea. Imagine watching the rooftop of your temple disappear below the waterline while you stand on dry ground 100 meters away. The children who grew up during the sinking years must have thought it was normal. They had no memory of the city at its full height. For them, the flooded districts were simply part of the landscape. Places you did not go, ruins you saw at low tide, walls that appeared and vanished with the seasons. Every generation normalizes the conditions it inherits. This is true for them. It is true for you. The mattress finally gave way. The house went under, and the sea closed over it like a mouth closing over a word. But here's where the neat explanation starts to fray. Because Heracleion did not sink alone, Canopus sank too, and the eastern promontory of the delta sank, and the coastline itself retreated inland by several kilometers. The entire region underwent a massive transformation, not just one city on bad ground, but a whole landscape reshaping itself. This is where the debate begins. Some researchers argue that the primary cause was tectonic, that a series of major earthquakes destabilized the entire delta margin. They point to the 365 CE earthquake, centered near Crete, which generated a tsunami so powerful that ships in Alexandria's harbor were thrown onto the rooftops of buildings. An event of that magnitude would have devastated the low-lying coast around Abu Qir Bay. The evidence for tsunami deposits in the sediment record is contested but not absent. Some cores show thin layers of coarse marine sand within otherwise fine terrestrial sediment, a signature that some geologists interpret as tsunami was hover. The salt spray hangs in the air. It has been hanging there for 2,000 years. Others argue that the sinking was primarily hydrological, that changes in the Nile's behavior caused the delta to restructure itself. The Nile is not a static river. It has shifted its course repeatedly over the millennia, abandoning old channels and carving new ones. When the Canopic branch of the Nile, the westernmost channel, the one that fed Heracleion directly, began to silt up and lose flow, the sediment supply to the coast diminished. Without fresh sediment being deposited to replace what the sea was eroding, the coastline began to collapse inward. Think of it as a bank account. For centuries, the Nile was making regular deposits, silt, sand, clay, into the coastal zone. These deposits built up the delta, extended the shoreline, and provided a stable foundation for construction. But when the Canopic branch weakened, the deposits slowed. Meanwhile, the sea kept making withdrawals, eroding the coast, undercutting the sediment, pulling material offshore. When withdrawals exceed deposits, the balance drops, and eventually, the account is empty. A third group of researchers emphasizes the role of human activity. The construction of heavy stone buildings on soft delta sediment accelerated the natural compaction process. The network of canals that connected the city to the Nile altered local water flow, potentially destabilizing the ground further. And the removal of vegetation from the surrounding marshes for farmland and fuel may have eliminated the root systems that helped bind the sediment together. In other words, the people of Heracleion may have contributed to their own city's destruction, not through malice or ignorance, but through the simple act of building ambitiously on fragile ground. The same confidence that allowed them to raise granite temples on river mud, that extraordinary faith in their ability to shape the world, may have been one of the forces that pulled the world out from under them. You have done this too. Built something on ground you hoped would hold. Trusted a foundation you could not fully see. This is not ancient history. This is Tuesday. The most recent research, published by Christoph Bernhard and colleagues at the Leibniz Institute, proposes a multi-factor model. No single cause explains the submersion. It was a convergence, tectonic activity, sea level change, sediment compaction, hydrological shifts, and human loading all operating simultaneously over centuries. The city did not drown because of one catastrophe. It drowned because of a dozen slow ones happening at the same time. This is, in some ways, a more frightening explanation than a single dramatic event. A tidal wave is terrifying but comprehensible. A single earthquake is devastating but finite. But a slow convergence of forces, each one manageable on its own, combining to produce irreversible destruction, that is harder to see coming. That is harder to fight. That is the kind of danger that lets you repair your walls and prop up your columns and convince yourself that the problem is under control, right up until the moment the floor drops out. The silence after a collapse is different from ordinary silence. It has weight, and Canopus adds another layer of complexity. While Heracleion was primarily a commercial port, Canopus was a religious and recreational center. Its ruins show a different pattern of destruction. The Temple of Serapis, famous across the ancient world, did not simply sink into liquefied ground. Parts of it appear to have been deliberately dismantled before submersion. Stones removed, columns toppled in an orderly fashion. This suggests that the inhabitants had warning. They knew the ground was failing. They had time to salvage sacred objects before the water came. Other structures in Canopus show signs of fire damage beneath the waterline, burns that occurred before the submersion, not after. Were these accidental fires in a city already in crisis? Were they deliberate acts of destruction by retreating inhabitants who preferred to burn their temples rather than leave them to the sea? Or were they the marks of conflict, raids by desert tribes, or rival factions taking advantage of a city in its death throes? The evidence does not say. The evidence lies in the mud and waits for better questions. There is also the mystery of the Osiris cult objects. In a canal near the temple precinct, Gaudio's team found a collection of ritual artifacts associated with the mysteries of Osiris, a secret annual ceremony in which priests reenacted the death and resurrection of the god. Lead figurines of Osiris were discovered alongside miniature sarcophagi and ceremonial vessels. Some of these objects were clearly crafted to be destroyed as part of the ritual, broken intentionally, then cast into the sacred waterway as offerings. The mysteries of Osiris were among the most sacred rites in Egyptian religion. They were performed in darkness. They were performed in water. They involved the symbolic drowning and rebirth of the god, a narrative that takes on an eerie resonance when you consider that the city where these rites were performed was itself slowly drowning. Did the priests see the parallel? Did they interpret the sinking of their city as a divine act? Osiris pulling Heracleion down into his watery realm, transforming it from a city of the living into a city of the dead? We cannot know, but the objects are there. The lead figurines lie in the canal mud, frozen mid-ritual, their ceremony interrupted by the very element that gave the ceremony its meaning. Water answering water, silence answering silence. What the underwater excavations have revealed with certainty is the sheer scale of what was lost. Gaudio's team has surveyed only a fraction of the total site area. The ruins of Heracleion alone stretch across more than 11 square kilometers of seabed. Canopus covers an additional area of comparable size. Together, the two cities represent one of the largest submerged archaeological sites in the world, and one of the least explored. Funding is intermittent. The work is slow, expensive, and physically dangerous. Divers can spend only limited time at depth before decompression obligations force them to the surface. Visibility is often measured in centimeters, not meters. Currents shift the silt, covering artifacts that were visible one season and revealing new ones the next. Every expedition is a negotiation with the sea, and the sea does not compromise. There are objects down there that no human eye has seen since the day they sank. Statues still standing upright in temple courtyards, draped in algae, attended by fish. Offering tables still set with the remains of the last meal placed upon them. Lead anchors still hooked into harbor walls, waiting for ships that dissolved centuries ago. Storage jars still sealed, their contents unknown. What is inside those jars? Wine turned to vinegar, turned to chemistry, grain turned to dust, oil turned to a thin, dark residue on the inner walls. No one knows yet. The jars sit in the mud, keeping their secrets the way the dead keep theirs, not out of spite, but simply because no one has asked. The question that carries us forward is not what destroyed Heracleion and Canopus. We have a reasonable answer to that, even if the proportions are debated. The question is what these cities were like when they were alive. What did it feel like to walk their streets? What did the air taste like in the morning? What sounds woke you if you slept near the harbor? These are not academic questions. These are human questions. And they're the questions that the artifacts in the mud are slowly, patiently beginning to answer. Consider the anchors. More than 700 lead and stone anchors have been cataloged across the site. Each anchor represents a ship. Each ship carried a crew. Each crew member had a name, a family, a reason for being at sea. The smallest anchors belonged to fishing boats, two-man vessels that ventured into the shallows at dawn and returned at dusk. The largest anchors weighed over half a ton and belonged to warships or heavy merchantmen. They were carved from single blocks of granite and shaped with a precision that suggests professional workshops dedicated to nothing but anchor making. 700 anchors, 700 arrivals, 700 moments when a rope was thrown, a stone was dropped, and a journey ended. Each one is a story we will never fully hear. The bronze nails tell their own tale. Thousands of them, square-shanked, hand-forged, no two exactly alike. Each nail was made by a blacksmith who heated the metal in a charcoal forge, shaped it on an anvil with a hammer, and quenched it in water with a sharp hiss. That hiss, the sound of hot metal meeting cold water, was one of the most common sounds in the ancient world. You can hear it in every port, every workshop, every construction site from Carthage to the Indus Valley. It was the sound of civilization being assembled, one nail at a time. If you listen carefully right now, in the stillness around you, you might catch the echo of it, or you might catch only your own breath. Either way, the silence is honest, and perhaps the most haunting finds are the simplest. A child's toy, a small clay horse with one leg broken off, a cosmetic palette made of schist, still stained with the residue of ground malachite, the green eye paint that Egyptians wore for both beauty and protection against the sun. a set of dice carved from bone, a comb made from ivory with teeth so fine they could only have been used for lice removal. These are not grand artifacts. They will never be the centerpiece of a museum exhibition, but they're the truest evidence we have that Heracleion was not just a port, not just a temple complex, not just a customs checkpoint. It was a home. People lived there. They played games. They did their hair. They painted their eyes in the morning and washed the paint off at night. The comb has been underwater for more than 1,000 years. The lice it once removed are long gone. But the gesture, the patient, repetitive, deeply human act of running a comb through a child's hair, that gesture is still alive. Someone is doing it right now, somewhere in the world, without knowing they are repeating a motion that was once performed in a city at the bottom of the sea. The tide shifts, the silt settles, and somewhere beneath the surface, a sealed jar holds its breath. Picture this. It is the year 450 BCE. The month is what the Egyptians call Ake, the season of inundation, when the Nile rises and the delta becomes a shallow inland sea. Dawn has not arrived yet. The sky is a deep indigo bruise along the eastern horizon, not yet cracked by light. The air is warm and wet, heavy with moisture that clings to skin like a second layer of clothing. You can taste the river in it, mineral, vegetal, faintly metallic, like licking a copper coin. A woman wakes. She does not have a name that survived. No inscription records her. No stele commemorates her birth or death. She is one of the thousands who lived in Heracleion and left no written trace. Not because she was unimportant, but because importance in the ancient world was measured by proximity to power, and she lived at the ordinary edges of a city that has itself been forgotten. But she was real. Her bones may still be down there, somewhere in the silt. And this morning, she wakes. The first thing she hears is water. Not a crash or a roar, a lapping. A soft, irregular rhythm of small waves against the wooden pilings beneath her house. Her house is built on stilts, like many homes in the delta. The floor is raised above the flood line by roughly a meter. Beneath it, the dark water of the canal moves slowly, carrying fragments of reed and the occasional dead fish toward the harbor. The lapping is constant. It is the heartbeat of the city. Your own heartbeat is doing something similar right now. A soft, irregular rhythm. Persistent, unnoticed until someone mentions it. The second thing she hears is birds. Ibises, hundreds of them, roosting in the papyrus thickets along the canal banks. Their calls are harsh, clipped, almost mechanical. They sound nothing like songbirds. They sound like rusty hinges opening and closing. But they are sacred to Thoth, the god of knowledge and writing, and their presence in the city is considered a blessing. No one harms them. No one drives them away. They nest in the temple precincts and fish in the canals and leave white streaks of guano on the granite columns. And the priests tolerate it because the gods have chosen these birds, and who are they to argue? She swings her legs off the sleeping mat. The mat is woven from palm fiber, rough against the skin but durable, resistant to mildew in the relentless humidity. The floor beneath it is packed earth covered with a thin layer of plaster, swept clean each evening with a bundle of dried reeds. Her feet touch the floor, and the coolness rises through her soles and her ankles. The earth remembers the night. It holds the cold the way a cellar holds silence. The smell of the house is layered. On top, the sharp green scent of fresh thatch. The roof was repaired last week. New bundles of dried papyrus lashed to the wooden frame. Beneath that, the warm animal smell of the goat tethered in the small courtyard behind the house. Beneath that, smoke, old smoke, embedded in the walls and floor from years of cooking fires. And beneath everything, always, the wet mineral breath of the delta itself, rising through the floorboards, rising through the stilts, rising from the water that is always there, always moving, always patient. She stands. She stretches. The joints in her knees pop, a sound that has not changed in 30 centuries. Through the single window of the house, a rectangular opening covered with a lattice of woven reeds, she can see the canal. A barge is already moving through it, pulled by two men standing at opposite ends. The barge is loaded with amphorae, probably wine from one of the Greek ships that arrived yesterday. The men pull in silence. The only sound is the soft thud of the pole hitting the canal bottom and the slow gurgle of water parting around the hull. They have done this 1,000 times. Their bodies know the rhythm without thinking. Push, lift, swing, plant, push. The light is changing. The indigo sky is warming to violet, then to a pale orange that bleeds upward from the horizon like dye spreading through wet cloth. The sun has not yet appeared, but its influence is already reshaping the world. Shadows are shortening. Colors are returning to things that were gray a moment ago. The granite columns of the temple, visible above the rooftops 2 streets away, are shifting from dark silhouettes to their true color. A dusty pink, veined with black, quarried from the bedrock of Upper Egypt and carried here on barges not unlike the one passing beneath her window. She turns from the window and begins the first task of the day: fire. The cooking hearth is a shallow clay basin set on a raised platform of mud brick in the courtyard. Last night's embers are still warm beneath a layer of gray ash. She kneels beside it, cups her hands around a small bundle of dried grass, and blows. Gently, steadily, the way you might blow on a sleeping child's forehead to cool a fever. Except this breath is meant to wake, not to soothe. The embers glow. The grass catches. A thin ribbon of smoke rises into the dawn air, carrying with it the smell of burning cellulose. That universal campfire smell that your ancestors knew and your nose still recognizes, coded deep in the architecture of your olfactory system. Fire started. Day started. The two were the same thing. Beyond the courtyard wall, the city is stirring. She can hear it assembling itself out of silence. The creak of a neighbor's door, the splash of someone emptying a chamber pot into the canal, the low murmur of voices from the house across the waterway, where the rope maker and his wife are already arguing about something she cannot quite make out. The argument is familiar. It happens most mornings. It is strangely comforting. The way a clock's ticking is comforting. It means the world is continuing. From the direction of the harbor, a deeper sound, the groan of timber under strain. A large ship being winched into dock, its hull pressing against the stone quay as the ropes tighten. Men are shouting instructions in Greek, their words clipped and urgent, bouncing off the water and the warehouse walls. She does not speak Greek fluently, but she knows the harbor words. Rope, anchor, careful. Every port city produces bilingual children. Every border town teaches its people to hear in 2 languages, even if they speak in only one. The air is thickening as the sun climbs. Humidity in the delta during inundation season can exceed 90%. The air does not just feel wet, it resists movement. Walking through it is like walking through warm gauze. Sweat does not evaporate. It sits on the skin, mixing with a fine layer of dust that settles on everything, forming a thin paste that she will wash off in the canal at midday when the sun is directly overhead and the water is at its warmest. A dragonfly hovers over the canal. Its wings catch the new light and throw it back in fragments, blue, green, gold. It holds its position in the heavy air as if pinned there by an invisible thread, then darts sideways and vanishes into the reeds. Bread comes first. It always comes first. In Heracleion, as in every Egyptian settlement for 3,000 years, bread is not merely food. It is currency. It is ritual. It is identity. Workers are paid in bread. Offerings to the gods are made in bread. The dead are buried with bread for their journey to the afterlife. The word for bread and the word for life are tangled together in a language so thoroughly that separating them requires effort. She grinds a grain by hand. The grinding stone is a slab of rough basalt, worn smooth in the center from years of use, set into a wooden frame at waist height. The grain is emmer wheat, an ancient variety with a tough husk that must be removed before grinding. She pours a handful of kernels onto the stone and begins to push a smaller stone back and forth across them. The motion is rhythmic and hypnotic. Forward, back. Forward, back. The grain cracks. The husks separate. The flour collects in a groove at the base of the stone. This motion wears down teeth. Archaeologists studying skeletal remains from Egyptian sites consistently find severe dental wear in adult populations. Flat, ground-down molars caused by the microscopic particles of stone that inevitably contaminate hand-ground flour. Every loaf of bread in the ancient world contained tiny fragments of the grinding stone. Every bite was an act of slow self-erosion. The people of Heracleion ate stone with their bread and did not know it. Your teeth are smoother. Your flour is cleaner. But the hunger is the same. She mixes the flour with water from a clay jar. Nile water, slightly silty, tasting of earth and distance. She adds a pinch of natron, a naturally occurring salt collected from dried lake beds in the western desert, which acts as a leavening agent. The dough is shaped into flat rounds and placed directly on the hot surface of a clay oven, a beehive-shaped structure built into the courtyard wall. The oven has been preheated with dried cattle dung, which burns slowly and evenly and produces a heat that is gentler than wood fire. The smell of baking bread mingles with the smell of burning dung, and the combination is not unpleasant. It is the smell of morning. It is the smell of survival. While the bread bakes, she tends to the goat. The animal is small, brown, and irritable, a descendant of the wild bezoar goats domesticated in the Zagros Mountains 8,000 years earlier. It provides milk, which she collects in a shallow bowl. The milk is warm and rich, with a slightly gamey flavor that modern palates might find strong, but that she does not notice because she has never tasted anything else. She strains the milk through a piece of linen to remove hair and debris, then sets it aside for the children. The children. There are two, a boy of perhaps 7 and a girl of 4 or 5. They sleep on a shared mat in the back room of the house, curled together like two commas in a sentence. The boy wakes first, drawn by the smell of bread. He appears in the courtyard doorway with his hair tangled and his eyes still soft with sleep. He does not speak. He sits on the ground near the oven and waits. This is his morning ritual. It has not changed since he was old enough to walk. A dove calls from the rooftop. 3 notes, then silence. 3 notes, then silence. The tools of the household are few and carefully maintained. A bronze knife with a wooden handle, used for cutting bread, trimming reeds, and scraping hides. A set of ceramic bowls in graduated sizes, nested together on a shelf above the cooking area. A spindle and whirl for spinning flax fiber into thread. The woman's hands work the spindle in the late afternoons while the children play, her fingers twisting the fiber with a practiced motion that produces an even, strong thread suitable for weaving into linen cloth. A fishing net, owned by her husband, hung on wooden pegs along the courtyard wall, needing repair in 2 places where the knots have frayed. Her husband is not here. He left before dawn to take the small reed boat out onto the bay. Fishing is best in the early hours, before the sun heats the surface water and drives the fish deeper. He will return by mid-morning with whatever the sea has offered. Mullet, perch, catfish, sometimes a small ray that must be handled carefully because of its venomous spine. The catch will be cleaned on the stone step by the canal, the guts thrown into the water where they will be consumed within minutes by the eels and crabs that patrol the canal bottoms. Everything feeds something else. Nothing is wasted. The cycle is tight and old and unquestioned. In the afternoon, the heat becomes a physical force. It pushes people indoors, into the shade of their thick-walled houses where the temperature is 10 degrees cooler than the streets outside. The woman sits in the doorway with her spindle, her fingers working the flax without conscious direction. The thread grows between her fingers like a thought becoming a sentence. The children are playing a game with small stones, tossing them into the air and catching them on the backs of their hands. The game has no name that we know, but versions of it have been found in archaeological sites from Mesopotamia to Greece, suggesting that children across the ancient world invented the same game independently, the way rivers in different countries all find the same path downhill. A cat sleeps on the warm stone of the courtyard wall. Cats in Egyptian households are not pets in the modern sense. They are working animals, kept for their ability to catch the rats and mice that infest grain stores. But they are also sacred to the goddess Batet, and harming a cat, even accidentally, can result in severe punishment. The result is a unique relationship, utilitarian and holy at the same time. The cat does not know it is sacred. It knows only that it is warm and fed and undisturbed, which may be the same thing. In the late morning, she walks to the temple precinct, not to pray, or not only to pray. The temple is also the economic center of the district. Grain is stored in temple warehouses. Oil is distributed from temple reserves. Disputes are settled by temple officials. The boundary between sacred and secular does not exist in the way that modern minds might expect. The gods own the grain. The priests manage it. The people receive it. And everyone involved understands that this arrangement is both spiritual and practical, both divine and deeply, stubbornly human. The temple courtyard smells of incense and sweat and animal blood. A bull was sacrificed this morning. She can see the dark stain on the offering stone, already attracting flies. The meat will be distributed to the priests and temple workers after the god has consumed the spiritual essence. Nothing visible will change about the meat. It will look and smell and taste the same, but its sacred substance will have been extracted, leaving only the material husk for human consumption. This is theology made edible. This is faith you can chew. She collects her household's ration of oil, sesame oil, pressed from seeds grown in the fields south of the city. The oil is measured out by a temple scribe who marks the amount on a clay tablet with a reed stylus. The scribe does not look up. He has measured 10,000 rations. His hand moves automatically. The stylus presses into the wet clay with a soft click, and the transaction is complete. That click, the sound of bureaucracy, it has not changed either. On the way home, she passes the dye workshop. The smell hits her from 20 paces away, a thick, acrid, almost unbearable stench of fermenting urine and murex shells. The murex is a sea snail harvested from the rocky shallows east of Canopus. When crushed and left to rot in stone vats under the sun, the glands of the murex produce a vivid purple dye, Tyrian purple, the most expensive colorant in the ancient world. A single garment dyed in murex purple costs more than most families earn in a year. The dye workers stand ankle deep in the fermentation vats, their skin stained to the elbows, their nostrils long since deadened to the stink. They are among the lowest paid workers in the city. They produce the color that adorns the highest-ranking priests and officials. This is how wealth works. Someone stands in the stench, so someone else can wear the beauty. The arrangement is old. It has not been improved upon. She passes the metalworker's stall where a young apprentice is hammering a sheet of bronze into a shallow bowl. Each strike rings out, a bright, clear tone that changes pitch as the metal thins and the bowl takes shape. The apprentice is perhaps 14 years old. His arms are already corded with muscle. His fingertips are calloused and burn-scarred. He will do this work for the rest of his life, and his son after him, and his son's son after that. The skill passes through hands, not through books. It lives in the muscle memory of fingers that know exactly how hard to strike and at what angle, knowledge that cannot be written down because it exists below the level of language. The sound of the hammer fades behind her as she turns onto the canal path. A heron stands in the shallows, perfectly still, a gray statue of patience. She walks home through streets that are narrower than they used to be. She knows this because her mother told her, and her mother's mother told her mother. The canal that runs alongside the main market street was once wide enough for 2 barges to pass side by side. Now it barely accommodates one. The water level is higher than it was a generation ago. The lowest step of the stone staircase that leads down to the water's edge, the step where women kneel to wash linen, is permanently submerged now. It has been submerged for 3 years. No one is alarmed by this. Not yet. The delta has always been a place of change. The river rises and falls with the seasons. Channels shift. Sandbanks appear and disappear. The people who live here are accustomed to impermanence. They build with materials that can be replaced. Wood, reed, mud brick. Only the temples are built to last. Only the gods deserve stone. But something is different this year. The ground feels wrong. She notices it first in the courtyard of her house. The clay floor, which she swept level yesterday evening, has developed a slight tilt overnight. A bowl placed on the cooking platform rolls gently to one side. The door frame, which has always been square, now shows a thin crack along the upper corner where the lintel meets the wall. These are small signs. They can mean nothing. Wood swells in the humidity. Clay shifts when it gets wet. Houses in the delta have always required maintenance. But the goat noticed too. Animals red the ground with their bodies in ways that humans have forgotten. The goat has been restless for 3 days, pulling at its tether, refusing to lie down, making low sounds in its throat that are not quite bleats and not quite growls. The children find this funny. She does not. The sound of the earth settling is not a sound you hear with your ears. You hear it with your feet. A faint vibration, too low for the auditory nerve but clear to the bones of the ankle and the sole. It is the sound of sediment rearranging itself under pressure, grains of sand and clay sliding against each other as the ground slowly, imperceptibly, loses its ability to hold weight. You have felt this, standing on a subway platform when the train approaches. That tremor in the floor before you hear the noise. That is your body reading vibration the way her body read the delta. 3 days after the floor tilts, the earthquake comes. It arrives without warning. No thunder, no darkening sky, no omen that the priest can later claim they foresaw. The ground simply moves. It shifts sideways first, a lateral jolt that knocks clay jars off shelves and sends the cat leaping from the courtyard wall in a single fluid arc of terror. Then it shakes, a rapid, juddering vibration that travels through the stilts of the house and up through the floor and into the bones of everyone standing on it. It is not a large earthquake, not by the standards of the Eastern Mediterranean, where the collision of tectonic plates produces regular seismic activity ranging from mild tremors to catastrophic ruptures. This one is moderate, perhaps a magnitude 5, centered somewhere beneath the sea floor north of the delta. The shaking lasts for approximately 15 seconds. 15 seconds is not long. Count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, In those 15 seconds, the waterlogged sediment beneath Heracleion liquefies. The technical term is seismic liquefaction, a process in which saturated, loosely packed sediment temporarily loses its structural integrity and behaves like a dense liquid. The ground does not crack open. It does not split apart in dramatic fissures. It simply stops being solid. It becomes a thick slurry of sand, clay, and water, and everything sitting on top of it drops. The drop is not uniform. The heaviest structures sink fastest. The grand temple of Ammonius Jerub, with its massive granite columns and stone foundations, plunges downward by nearly a meter in a single event. The sound it makes is not a crash. It is a groan, a deep, resonant vibration transmitted through the ground and the water, felt more than heard, like the lowest note of an organ played in a cathedral too large to see. The water surges, not away from the sea, not yet, but a displacement. When the ground drops, the water that saturates it is squeezed upward and outward. Canals overflow. The harbor basin lurches. Ships at anchor snap their mooring lines and drift into each other with a sound of splintering wood. The woman's house, on its wooden stilts, sways. The stilts are flexible enough to absorb some of the motion, but the clay walls are not. A section of the rear wall collapses inward, sending a cloud of dust into the courtyard. The children scream. The goat has already broken its tether. It is gone. After the shaking stops, there is a silence so complete it has texture. You can feel it against your skin. The birds have stopped calling. The dogs have stopped barking. The water in the canals is still sloshing, but the human sounds, voices, footsteps, the clatter of tools, have ceased entirely. Everyone is frozen. Everyone is listening. Everyone is waiting to see if the ground will move again. It is not. Not today. But the damage is already done. In the temple precinct, a column has shifted on its base. Not fallen, but tilted, leaning now at an angle that is visible to the naked eye. The priests gather around it, arguing. Some say it can be braced with timber. Others say the foundation must be dug out and repacked with fresh stone. A third group says nothing needs to be done. The column has always leaned slightly, they claim, and the earthquake merely made it more obvious. This last group is wrong, but they're the loudest, and in the politics of the temple, volume often substitutes for evidence. In the harbor, two ships have collided. One has a cracked hull below the waterline and is taking on water. Sailors are bailing with buckets and stuffing rags into the breach, while a carpenter assesses whether the damage can be repaired afloat or whether the ship must be beached. The harbor master is demanding that the damaged vessel be moved before it blocks the main channel. The captain of the damaged ship is demanding compensation from the captain of the ship that drifted into him. Nobody is getting what they want. The gulls are circling overhead, indifferent to all of it. When she walks to the canal to check the water level, she sees that it has risen, not by a finger's width, by a full handspan. The second step of the stone staircase, the one that was above water this morning, is now submerged. The city has dropped. The sea has not moved, but the relationship between them has changed permanently in 15 seconds. She stands at the water's edge and looks at the submerged step. The wet stone is darker than the dry stone above it. The boundary between wet and dry is sharp and new. Yesterday, it was not there. Now it is. And she understands, not with her mind, not with words, but with the deep animal knowledge that lives in the spine and the gut, that it will not go back. The water will not retreat. The step will not dry. Something has been lost that cannot be recovered. She turns back toward the house. The children are in the courtyard, standing in the rubble of the collapsed wall, looking at her with the wide, waiting eyes that children have when they need an adult to tell them whether they should be afraid. She does not know what to tell them. She does not know if the ground will hold tonight. She does not know if the water will rise further. She knows only what her body knows, that the earth beneath her feet is not what it was, and that the city she was born in is becoming something else. Down the canal, an old man is standing in his doorway, looking at the water. He has seen this before. Not this specific earthquake, but this specific feeling, the aftermath, the recalibration, the quiet reckoning of what has changed and what remains. He was a child during the last significant tremor 30 years ago. He remembers his father walking to the canal and studying the water level in exactly the way this woman is studying it now. The same posture, the same expression, the same slow understanding settling into the face like sediment settling into still water. History does not repeat, but the body's response to disaster has a limited vocabulary. Fear, assessment, adaptation, grief, and then, eventually, the resumption of ordinary life. Because ordinary life is the only life there is. The bread is still in the oven. It is not burned. Small mercies persist, even when the ground fails. She takes the bread out. She breaks it. She feeds her children. And outside, the canal water laps against a step it could not reach yesterday, tasting the stone with a slow, exploratory tongue, learning the shape of a new boundary that it will push again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until there are no more steps, no more streets, no more temple columns visible above the surface, until there is only water and silence, and the deep, patient dark of the Mediterranean closing over a city like a hand closing over a candle flame. The flame goes out, but the warmth lingers in the palm. There's a city sinking right now, not in metaphor, not in poetry. Right now, as you lie here, as your breathing slows and the weight of the day lifts from your chest, a city is losing ground to water. Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, sits on a swampy coastal plain at the mouths of 13 rivers. It is home to more than 10 million people, and it is sinking at a rate that would have horrified the engineers of Heracleion. Not 1 centimeter per year, but in some neighborhoods, as much as 25 centimeters per year. That is 10 inches in a single year. In the northern districts of the city, entire ground floors of buildings have disappeared below street level within a decade. Roads that were flat in 2010 now dip into permanent puddles that never drain. Walls crack, foundations tilt, the geometry of daily life warps and shifts, and the people who live there adapt, the way people always adapt, by raising their thresholds, by pumping out their basements, by pretending the water is temporary. The water is not temporary. It never is. The parallels between Heracleion and Jakarta are not poetic. They are geological. Both cities were built on river deltas, flat, low-lying plains composed of unconsolidated sediment deposited over millennia by flowing water. Both cities extracted groundwater from beneath their foundations for drinking, irrigation, and industry. And both cities discovered, too late, that removing water from beneath a city built on soft ground is like removing stuffing from a cushion. The surface collapses, the ground compresses, and once compressed, it does not bounce back. The process is called subsidence, and it is irreversible on any human timescale. In Heracleion, the subsidence was driven primarily by the weight of the city itself pressing down on waterlogged sediment, combined with tectonic activity and changes in the Nile's flow. In Jakarta, the primary driver is groundwater extraction. The aquifers beneath the city are being pumped dry faster than rainfall can replenish them. As the water table drops, the clay layers above it compact. The surface follows the water table downward, centimeter by centimeter, year by year. A pipe drips somewhere in the dark. It has been dripping for longer than anyone remembers. The Indonesian government has recognized the scale of the crisis. In 2019, President Joko Widodo announced plans to relocate the national capital from Jakarta to a new city called Nusantara, to be built from scratch on the island of Borneo, 600 miles to the northeast. The decision was driven partly by the sinking and partly by the flooding, the traffic, the pollution, and the simple logistical impossibility of governing a nation of 270 million people from a city that is slowly being swallowed by the Java Sea. The pharaohs of the late period moved their administrative operations away from Heracleion II. They shifted the center of gravity to Alexandria, a city built on bedrock, a city that did not sink. The pattern repeats. The powerful leave, the ordinary stay. But Jakarta is not the only echo. Venice has been sinking for centuries, roughly 2 millimeters per year from natural subsidence, accelerated by industrial groundwater extraction in the 20th century. The Meuse barrier system, a series of hinged gates installed at the entrances to the Venetian lagoon, became operational in 2020 after decades of delays and cost overruns. It is designed to hold back the Adriatic during high tides. Whether it will hold back the long-term rise of the sea is a question no engineer has been willing to answer with confidence. New Orleans sits below sea level, protected by a system of levees that failed catastrophically during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The city is built on the Mississippi River Delta, the same type of geological formation as the Nile Delta, the same type that swallowed Heracleion. The sediment beneath New Orleans is compacting at a rate comparable to Jakarta's worst neighborhoods. The levees have been rebuilt. The pumps have been upgraded, but the ground is still sinking, and the Gulf of Mexico is still rising, and the gap between the two is closing at a pace that can be measured in the height of a child growing up. Miami, Shanghai, Bangkok, Lagos, Dhaka. These are cities where tens of millions of people live at or below elevations that will be reached by seawater within the lifetimes of children already born. The specifics vary. Some face subsidence, some face sea level rise, some face both, but the underlying dynamic is the same one that destroyed Heracleion. The water comes, the ground gives way, and the question is not whether the city will be affected, but how fast, and who will be forced to leave first. The answer to that last question is always the same. The poor leave last, because they have nowhere else to go. You are lying in a bed right now. That bed is at a specific elevation above sea level. It might be 3 meters. It might be 30. But it is a number, and that number is part of a calculation that your grandchildren may need to make. Heracleon's residents did not know their elevation was a death sentence. They did not have satellite measurements or tidal gauges or climate models. They had only their feet on the ground and the water at the staircase and the slow, maddening patience of a sea that never stopped asking for more room. You have the data they did not have. The question is what you will do with it. But that is not a question for tonight. Tonight is for rest. The rain falls on Jakarta the way it fell on Heracleion, warm and indifferent and relentless. There is a photograph, taken in 2019, widely circulated, of a mosque in North Jakarta. The mosque was built in the 1970s on ground that was then 2 meters above sea level. In the photograph, the mosque is surrounded by water, not floodwater, permanent water. The sea has reached the mosque and stayed. The faithful still pray there, wading through ankle-deep water to reach the entrance, removing their shoes on steps that are now submerged, performing their ablutions in water that has already performed its own kind of ablution on the building itself, stripping the paint, dissolving the mortar, eating the foundations with the same patient chemistry that ate the foundations of the grand temple of Ammonius Cherub. The gesture of prayer remains the same, even when the floor is underwater. The body bows, The forehead touches the ground. The hands open. This continuity is not trivial. It is the thing that survives when architecture fails. And then there is the question of what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. Heracleion vanished from human memory for over 1,000 years. It was not erased by violence or censorship. It was simply overtaken by the present, by new cities, new priorities, new stories that seemed more relevant than the story of a drowned port. The forgetting was not malicious. It was organic. Civilizations shed their memories the way trees shed leaves. Not because the leaves are worthless, but because there's only so much a living system can carry. We're shedding memories now. The names of villages swallowed by rising seas in Bangladesh, in Tuvalu, in the Marshall Islands. These names are being lost in real time. Not because no one cares, but because the world generates more information than any culture can absorb. The drowning of a village that housed 300 people does not compete with a news cycle. It slips below the surface of collective attention the way Heracleion slipped below the surface of Abu Qir Bay. Quietly, completely, without ceremony. The water does not distinguish between a temple and a house. It takes them both with equal patience. Here is something your body knows that your mind has forgotten. You were not built for this world. Not this specific world. This world of concrete and fluorescent light and 24-hour news cycles and alarm clocks and processed sugar and a low constant hum of electrical systems that never turn off. Your body was built for a world that looked much more like Heracleion than like any modern city. A world of natural light and natural dark. A world where food was seasonal and labor was physical and silence was not something you had to purchase. The mismatch between the body you have and the world you live in is one of the defining tensions of modern existence. Evolutionary biologists call it the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. The set of conditions under which your species was shaped by natural selection over hundreds of thousands of years. Those conditions did not include office chairs. They did not include refined carbohydrates. They did not include the blue light of screens pouring into your retinas at 11 o'clock at night, suppressing melatonin production and convincing your pineal gland that it is still afternoon. Your pineal gland is older than civilization. It does not understand electricity. The woman in Heracleion woke with the sun and slept when it set. Her circadian rhythm was synchronized with the rotation of the earth in a way that yours almost certainly is not. She ate food that had been alive within hours of consumption. Grain ground that morning, bread baked that morning, fish caught that morning, milk drawn that morning. The caloric density of her diet was lower than yours, but the nutrient density was higher. She consumed almost no refined sugar. Her gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria that live in the human digestive tract and influence everything from immune function to mood, was populated by organisms that had co-evolved with the human diet over millennia. Your gut microbiome is different. It has been altered by antibiotics, preservatives, emulsifiers, and the radical simplification of the modern diet. This is not a moral failing. It is not your fault. It is a consequence of living in a world that your body did not evolve to inhabit. You are not broken. You are a perfectly calibrated organism operating in conditions it was never calibrated for. The silence between these sentences is the kind of silence your nervous system was designed for. Consider sleep. The woman in Heracleion slept on a palm fiber mat on a packed earth floor in a dark room with no artificial light source. When the sun set, it was dark, truly dark, not the amber half-dark of a city at night, where streetlights and screens and the reflected glow of a million windows create a perpetual twilight that your brain cannot fully distinguish from dawn. Her dark was absolute. It was the dark your eyes were evolved for. a darkness that triggers the full cascade of neurochemical events that constitute healthy sleep. Melatonin production, core temperature drop, slow wave sleep onset, the consolidation of memory, the repair of tissue, the processing of emotion. You're trying to sleep right now. Your body is attempting to perform these ancient functions in conditions that actively work against them. The fact that you can sleep at all is a testament to the resilience of the system. But the system is straining. It has been straining for about a century, since the widespread adoption of electric lighting made perpetual wakefulness possible and, eventually, culturally mandatory. Thomas Edison called sleep a waste of time. He was wrong. Sleep is the oldest technology your body possesses. It predates language. It predates fire. It predates the opposable thumb. Every animal with a nervous system sleeps. Jellyfish sleep. Fruit flies sleep. The roundworm Cenorhabditis elegans, an organism with exactly 302 neurons, sleeps. Sleep is not a luxury. It is not laziness. It is not a design flaw that productivity culture can optimize away. It is the foundation on which every waking function is built. The woman in Heracleion did not need to be told this. Her world told her. The sun set, and the world went dark, and her body followed the darkened rest because there was nothing else to do, no screen to check, no notification to answer, no feed to scroll. The dark was not empty. It was full of the sounds of water and wind, and the breathing of her children, and the distant cry of a night heron hunting in the canal. That fullness is still available to you. It is available right now. The sound around you, whatever they are, traffic or wind, or the hum of a refrigerator, are not obstacles to sleep. They're the texture of your particular darkness. Your body can weave them into the descent the way the woman's body wove the lapping of water and the call of birds into hers. Let it. The physical labor of the ancient world is another mismatch. The woman in Heracleion walked an estimated 8 to 12 miles per day, simply performing the tasks of daily life. Fetching water, grinding grain, going to the market, visiting the temple, washing clothes in the canal. Her musculoskeletal system was shaped by this constant, low-intensity movement. Her bones were denser than yours. Her joints were more mobile. Her cardiovascular system was tuned by daily effort in a way that no gym membership can replicate, because the effort was not extracted from a schedule and performed in a dedicated facility. It was woven into the fabric of living. You are lying still right now. Your body is horizontal. Your muscles are releasing tension they have held all day. Tension that accumulated not from physical labor, but from the particular modern strain of sitting in chairs, staring at screens, and holding your shoulders in positions that no ancestor of yours ever held for more than a few minutes at a time. The ache in your neck, if you have one, is not age. It is mismatch. The tightness in your lower back is not weakness. It is a body built for walking, being asked to sit for 8 hours a day. Be kind to it. It is doing its best with instructions it was never given. Consider what the woman in Heracleion never experienced. She never heard a siren. She never received bad news from a glowing rectangle at 3 in the morning. She never sat in traffic. She never scrolled through images of strangers' lives and measured her own against them. She never ate food that had been engineered to be more appealing than anything found in nature. Foods with combinations of salt, sugar, and fat that hijack the dopamine system and create cravings that cannot be satisfied because the satisfaction would end the craving, and the craving is what sells the product. She had anxieties. She had fears. She worried about the harvest, about the flood, about the health of her children, about whether the fish would come. But her anxieties were concrete. They were rooted in physical reality. They could be addressed with physical action, mending a net, storing grain, reinforcing a wall. The modern anxieties that keep you awake at night are often abstract. They are rooted in information, in comparison, in the awareness of threats that are real but distant, urgent but unactionable. Your nervous system cannot distinguish between a predator in the grass and a headline on a screen. It fires the same alarm. It floods the same cortisol. And unlike the predator, the headline does not go away when you run. This is the mismatch, not a flaw in you, a flaw in the fit between you and the world you were handed. But here's the thing about mismatch. It cuts both ways. Your body may be out of sync with the modern world, but your mind, the same mind that built Heracleion, the same mind that calculated the angle of those granite columns, the same mind that navigated open water by the stars, that mind is spectacularly good at adaptation. It is, in fact, the single most adaptive organ ever produced by natural selection on this planet. Heracleion sank. The people survived. Not all of them, certainly, and not without loss. Loss of homes, loss of livelihoods, loss of the particular identity that comes from belonging to a specific place. But the population of Heracleion did not vanish when the city went under. They migrated. Some went east to Canopus, which was sinking too, but had not yet reached the critical point. Some went west to Alexandria, where the bedrock was solid and the opportunities were expanding. Some went south into the delta, back to the villages their grandparents had come from, back to the rhythms of farming and fishing that had sustained human life along the Nile for 5,000 years before Heracleion was ever built. They carried their skills with them. The shipwrights who had built and repaired vessels in Heracleon's harbor found work in Alexandria's dockyards. The priests who had served Ammonius Jerub found positions in other temples. The scribes who had kept customs records adapted their expertise to the Ptolemaic bureaucracy. The fishermen fished new waters. The bakers baked in new ovens. The mothers fed their children with the same hands, using the same gestures in different rooms. The knowledge survived the city. It always does. Consider the language itself. The Egyptian language did not die with Heracleion or with any single city. It evolved from Old Egyptian to Middle Egyptian to Late Egyptian to Demotic to Coptic, changing with each century the way a river changes course without ceasing to be a river. And when the spoken language finally faded from daily use, replaced by Arabic after the Islamic conquest, it survived in the liturgy of the Coptic Church, where it is still chanted today in services that echo across nave and apse in sounds that a priest of Ammonius Jerub would have partially recognized. The words endured. They migrated from mouth to mouth across 70 generations, each generation altering them slightly, each generation preserving enough for the next to understand. This is how human culture works. It does not require monuments. It does not require archives. It requires only one person telling another person something worth remembering. This is not unique to Heracleion. It is the central pattern of human history. Cities fall. Civilizations collapse. The Bronze Age ended in a catastrophic systems failure around 1200 BC. Multiple kingdoms, including the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, and the late Egyptian New Kingdom, experienced simultaneous decline due to a convergence of drought, famine, invasion, and disrupted trade networks. The collapse was devastating. Literacy was lost in some regions for centuries. Population levels dropped. Monumental architecture ceased. But people survived. They always survive. Not because they're the strongest species or the fastest or the most physically resilient. Humans are none of these things. A chimpanzee is stronger. A cheetah is faster. A cockroach is harder to kill. What humans have is something else entirely. The ability to cooperate with strangers, to transmit knowledge across generations through language, and to modify their behavior in response to changing conditions faster than any genetic adaptation could achieve. The fire pops, an ember rises, glows, and goes dark. When the Bronze Age collapsed, the survivors did not simply huddle in the ruins and wait for rescue. They reorganized. They formed new communities. They developed new technologies. Iron replaced bronze, not because iron was superior in every way, but because the tin trade routes that bronze required had been severed, and iron or was locally available. Necessity did not just mother invention. It mothered an entire technological revolution. The same pattern plays out at every scale. When the Black Death killed a third of Europe's population in the 14th century, the survivors inherited a transformed world. Labor was scarce. Wages rose. The feudal system, which had bound peasants to the land for centuries, began to crack. Workers who had been powerless suddenly had leverage. Not because anyone planned a revolution, but because the mathematics of supply and demand do not require ideology. They require only scarcity. From the ashes of the worst pandemic in recorded history, the seeds of social mobility took root. When the Library of Alexandria burned, whether by Caesar's troops, by Christian mobs, or by the slow attrition of underfunding, the historical record is unclear. The knowledge it contained was not wholly lost. Copies existed. Fragments survived in other collections, and the scholars who had studied there carried the texts in their memories. Imperfect and incomplete, but real. The library was a building. The knowledge was a network. The building burned. The network endured. When the Bronze Age collapsed, the survivors did not simply huddle in the ruins and wait for rescue. They reorganized. They formed new communities. They developed new technologies. Iron replaced bronze, not because iron was superior in every way, but because the tin trade routes that bronze required had been severed, and iron or was locally available. Necessity did not just mother invention. It mothered an entire technological revolution. When Rome fell, a slow, grinding decline rather than a single dramatic event, the knowledge of Roman engineering, agriculture, and governance did not disappear. It was preserved in monasteries, in Islamic libraries, in Byzantine archives. It was copied by hand, scroll by scroll, page by page, by individuals who understood that knowledge is more durable than the civilizations that produce it. The aqueducts crumbled. The roads grew over. But the mathematics that designed them survived on vellum and papyrus, waiting for a world that was ready to use them again. Your DNA carries the record of every survival. Every ancestor who lived through famine, plague, war, flood, drought, ice age, and the 1,000 small daily catastrophes of pre-modern life. Their resilience is encoded in your cells. The stress response that tightens your chest when you hear bad news is the same one that saved your ancestors from predators on the African savanna. The social instinct that makes you reach for your phone when you feel lonely is the same one that drove your ancestors to build settlements, share food, and keep watch through the night in shifts. You are the product of an unbroken chain of survivors that stretches back 4 billion years to the first self-replicating molecule in a warm pool on the surface of a young planet. Every link in that chain held. Every single one. Not one of your ancestors died before reproducing. The statistical improbability of your existence is so vast that no number can contain it. You are here because a trillion things went right. The water took Heracleion, but it did not take the people. It did not take their language, their recipes, their songs, their way of reading the stars, their method of grinding grain, their instinct to feed their children first. These things floated. They migrated. They found new ground to stand on. And when that ground sank too, as it always eventually does, they moved again. You are lying in the dark right now, descended from people who never stopped moving. Every cell in your body is the result of a journey that began in Africa and crossed deserts and mountains and oceans and ice sheets and 10,000 nights of uncertainty. Your ancestors did not know where they were going. They knew only that they could not stay where they were. And they went. That courage is in you, not as a metaphor, as a literal biological inheritance. The neural pathways that allow you to face uncertainty without freezing. Those were shaped by ancestors who faced saber-toothed cats and volcanic winters and the crossing of land bridges that no longer exist. The capacity for hope that keeps you going when the rational mind says the odds are poor. That was refined over millennia of surviving situations where the odds were always poor. And the capacity for rest. That is in you too. Your ancestors did not merely survive. They also stopped. They sat by rivers in the evening. They watched the sky change color. They held their children and felt the small, warm weight of a sleeping body against their chest and knew, without articulating it, that this moment was the point. Not the hunt, not the harvest, not the monument or the empire or the trade route. This, the warmth, the breathing, the quiet. You are having one of those moments right now. It does not need to be earned. It does not need to be justified. It is yours by inheritance, passed down through a lineage of people who understood that rest is not the absence of life. It is the center of it. The people of Heracleion did not have a word for resilience. They did not need one. They had the thing itself, embedded in their muscles, in their habits, in the way they rebuilt a cracked wall the morning after an earthquake and baked bread in an oven that was no longer level. They did not theorize about survival. They performed it, daily, quietly, without applause. You perform it too. Every morning you wake up into a world that is more complex, more demanding, and more disorienting than any world your body was designed for, and you navigate it. You solve problems your ancestors could not have imagined. You process more information in a single day than a citizen of Heracleion processed in a year. You maintain relationships across distances that would have been inconceivable to anyone born before the telegraph. And you do all of this while carrying a body that still thinks it lives in a river delta, still expects the sun to set without interruption, still craves the silence and the dark and the slow rhythm of a world that no longer exists. That is not weakness. That is strength carrying a heavy load. And yet you are here, listening, breathing, still capable, after the longest and strangest day, of lying down and letting the world continue without your supervision. Still capable of trust, trusting the dark, trusting the silence, trusting that morning will come and that you will meet it the way your ancestors met every morning for 10,000 generations. With open eyes, with willing hands, with a body that remembers how to begin again even when the mind is temporarily forgotten. The woman in Heracleion began again every morning. She swept her tilting floor. She fed her fire. She ground her grain. She did not have a word for resilience, but she had the act of it, repeated daily, without ceremony, without recognition, the way breathing is repeated, the way the tide is repeated, the way the Nile rises and falls and rises again. Rest now. The load can wait until morning. The water is calm tonight. The silt is settling. And somewhere beneath the surface of Abukir Bay, the face of Happy lies in the mud, wearing an expression that might be patience, might be compassion, might be the simple calm of something that has been waiting for 1,200 years and can wait 1,200 more. The waiting is not empty. It is full of everything the city once was. Pull back now. Pull back from the woman and her tilting floor. Pull back from the harbor and the ships and the face of Happy in the mud. Pull back from Jakarta and Venice and the flooded mosques and the sinking levees. Pull back from the century you live in, and the century before it, and the century before that. Keep going. Pull back until the individual human life is no longer visible, until it becomes a flicker, a spark, a single phosphorescent flash in a dark ocean so vast that the mind cannot hold its edges. This is deep time. The Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old. That number is easy to say and impossible to feel. The human brain did not evolve to comprehend billions. It evolved to count the members of a hunting party, to track the phases of the moon, to remember which berry bush fruited last autumn and which one killed a cousin. The scale of geological time exceeds the architecture of human cognition the way the ocean exceeds a cup. But try, just for a moment, compress the entire history of the Earth into a single year, January 1st to December 31st. On this scale, the planet forms on New Year's Day. The first single-celled life appears in late February. Multicellular organisms do not arrive until September. The dinosaurs appear on December 13th and are wiped out on December 26th. The entire history of the genus Homo, from the first stone tools in East Africa to this sentence you're hearing right now, occupies the last 40 minutes of December 31st. 40 minutes out of a year. Heracleion existed for roughly 1,000 years. On the compressed calendar, that is less than a quarter of a second. A blink, a single beat of a hummingbird's wing. The city that took centuries to build, that housed tens of thousands of lives, that collected taxes and burned incense, and launched ships and buried its dead. It flickers into existence and vanishes so quickly that if you were watching the calendar unfold in real time, you would miss it entirely. This is not meant to diminish it. This is meant to release you from the tyranny of your own scale. Your life, on this compressed calendar, lasts approximately 0.2 of a second. Less than a heartbeat. Less than the time it takes for a synapse to fire. And yet within those 0.2 of a second, you contain everything. Every memory, every conversation, every morning you woke up confused, and every evening you went to bed grateful. Every meal and every touch, and every moment of boredom, so deep it felt like drowning. All of it fits inside a duration too brief to measure with the tools of ordinary experience. The stars do not care. The tectonic plates do not notice. The water cycle that built the Nile Delta and dissolved Heracleion and will reshape every coastline on the planet over the next 10,000 years. It does not register individual human lives any more than a river registers individual drops. And that is the comfort, because if your life is a drop in a river, then the river holds you. You are not separate from it. You are not floating on it or fighting against it. You are it. The river is made of drops. Every drop matters, not because it is permanent, but because the river cannot exist without it. Remove a single drop and the river is diminished by exactly that amount. Imperceptibly, immeasurably, but actually, really, truly, the river does not keep score. It simply flows. The Nile has been flowing for roughly 30 million years. It predates the human species by 29,700,000 years. When the first hominids walked upright on the savannas of East Africa, the Nile was already ancient, already carving its valley, already depositing its silt, already flooding each summer with the regularity of a heartbeat so slow that each pulse takes 12 months. The pharaohs who built pyramids along its banks were latecomers. The priests of Heracleion who prayed to Happy, the god of the flood, were latecomers. You, lying in the dark, carrying the Nile in your school-taught memory and your documentary-fed imagination. You were the latest latecomer of all. But the river does not mind latecomers. It has room. Consider the Mediterranean Sea. It is young, as seas go, roughly 5 million years old in its current form. Before that, during the Mycenaean salinity crisis, the sea nearly evaporated entirely. The connection to the Atlantic was severed by tectonic movement, and without the inflow of ocean water, the Mediterranean dried up over the course of several 100,000 years. The seabed that now lies beneath 2,000 meters of water was once a scorching desert valley, hundreds of meters below the level of the Atlantic, covered in salt deposits tens of meters thick. Nothing lived there. Nothing could. Then the barrier broke. The Atlantic poured through the Strait of Gibraltar in what geologists call the Heracleion flood, a cataclysmic refilling that may have raised the sea level by 10 meters per day at its peak. The basin that is now the Mediterranean filled in a geological instant, perhaps as little as 2 years. The desert became a sea. The salt flats became a seabed, and life returned, slowly at first. Then with the explosive diversity that characterizes every ecosystem given water and time and the permission to exist. The water that covers Heracleion tonight is descended from that flood. It has been there for 5 million years, circulating, evaporating, falling as rain, returning to the sea, cycling through the bodies of fish and sailors and the clouds that cross the delta at dawn. Some of the water molecules in Abu Qir Bay have passed through the bodies of every civilization that ever drank from the Mediterranean. Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Phoenician, Ottoman, they all drank the same water. You drink it too. In a sense, the global water cycle connects every body of water on Earth into a single system. The glass of water on your nightstand is a distant relative of the water that swallowed Heracleion. Everything connects. Everything circulates. Nothing is truly lost. It only changes address. The sediment at the bottom of Abu Qir Bay contains pollen, microscopic grains of ancient pollen, preserved in the anaerobic mud, each one a messenger from a vanished landscape. Palynologists, scientists who study ancient pollen, have extracted cores from the seabed and cataloged the species. Date palm, acacia, tamarisk, papyrus, lotus, emmer wheat, barley. These are the plants that grew in and around Heracleion during its centuries of occupation. Their pollen drifted on the wind, settled on the water, sank into the mud, and waited. Each grain of pollen is smaller than a human hair. Each one contains the genetic signature of a plant that flowered in a specific season, in a specific year, in a world that no longer exists above the waterline. The lotus pollen came from flowers that opened in the canals where children swam. The wheat pollen came from fields that fed the city. The date palm pollen came from trees that provided shade in the courtyards where families ate their evening meals. The pollen does not know the city is gone. It holds its information with the indifference of a hard drive that has been unplugged but never erased. The data is intact. The world it describes is not. This is what deep time does. It preserves the small things and dissolves the large ones. The temple columns crack and fall. The harbor walls crumble. The statues lose their noses and their fingers and their painted eyes. But the pollen endures. The molecules endure. The chemical residue of a prayer, sealed inside a bronze vessel in a flooded temple, endures. The grand gestures of civilization are fragile. The tiny ones are indestructible. So here you are, at the end of a story about a city that drowned, in a world where cities are drowning still, lying in a body that was built for a world that no longer exists, breathing air that has been breathed by every human who ever lived. The statistical improbability of this moment is staggering. Start with the numbers. The human genome contains roughly 3 billion base pairs. Each base pair is a letter in the instruction manual that built your body. The probability of any specific arrangement of 3 billion base pairs occurring by chance is so close to zero that the difference is meaningless. You are not a random event. You are the product of a selection process that has been running continuously for 4 billion years, testing every variation, discarding what fails, keeping what works. And here you are, the latest working model. But the genome is only part of the story. Consider the chain of events that had to occur for your specific genome to exist. Your parents had to meet. Their parents had to meet. Their parents' parents had to meet. Go back 10 generations, roughly 300 years, and you have over 1,000 direct ancestors. Go back 20 generations, and you have over 1 million. Go back 40 generations, to roughly the time of Heracleion, and you have over 1 trillion theoretical ancestor slots, though the actual number of distinct individuals is much smaller due to the overlapping of family trees and small populations. Every single one of those ancestors survived to reproductive age. Every single one found a mate. Every single one produced at least one child who also survived to reproductive age. Not one link in the chain broke. Not during the Black Death. Not during the fall of Rome. Not during the Ice Ages. Not during the famines and the wars and the shipwrecks and the fevers and the births that went wrong and the harvests that failed and the predators that stalked the edge of the firelight. If any one of them had died a day earlier, if any one of them had turned left instead of right, had eaten the wrong berry, had been standing in the wrong place when the earthquake struck, you would not exist. Not a different version of you. Not you with different hair or a different name. Nothing. The specific consciousness that is hearing these words would never have occurred. Let that settle. Not as pressure, not as obligation, as wonder. Wonder is the correct response to your own existence. Not pride. You did not earn it. Not anxiety. You cannot lose it while you still draw breath. Just wonder. The same wonder that a diver feels when the murky water of Abu Qir Bay clears for a moment and the face of a god appears in the Silt, staring upward with stone eyes that have not seen light in 1,000 years. That feeling, the sudden, quiet shock of encountering something ancient and real and entirely unexpected, that feeling is available to you right now, directed inward. You are the ancient thing. You are the artifact. You are the sealed jar whose contents have not yet been cataloged. What is inside you? What has been preserved in the anaerobic layers of your deepest self, sealed away from the oxygen of daily consciousness, waiting to be found? You do not need to answer tonight. The jar can stay sealed a little longer. The question is enough. The question is the beginning of the archaeology of the self, a dig that takes a lifetime and never quite reaches the bottom layer. The woman in Heracleion, the one who ground her grain and fed her children and watched the water rise over the second step. She is almost certainly one of your ancestors. Not directly, perhaps, but through the tangled web of human migration and intermarriage that connects every living person to every person who lived more than a few thousand years ago. Geneticists call this the identical ancestors point, the date in the past beyond which every human who has living descendants is an ancestor of every person alive today. For people of European and Middle Eastern descent, this point is estimated at roughly 1400 BCE, well within the lifetime of Heracleion. She is in you. Her calcium is in your bones, not the specific atoms. Atoms recycle too quickly for that. But the pattern, the blueprint that told her body how to build bone from calcium and phosphorus is the same blueprint that told your body the same thing. The instructions have not changed. The raw materials rotate, but the architecture endures. Your teeth are made the same way hers were. Your blood carries oxygen the same way. Your eyes focus light through a lens that is functionally identical to the one she used to watch the barges on the canal. The design is 400 million years old. inherited from the first vertebrates that evolved image-forming eyes in the shallow seas of the Devonian period. You see with ancient eyes. You breathe with ancient lungs. You grieve with an ancient heart. The wind outside your window tonight, whatever window, whatever city, whatever hemisphere, that wind is part of the same atmospheric system that carried the smell of bread from the ovens of Heracleion across the rooftops to the harbor. The atmosphere does not have borders. It does not have memory, but it has continuity. The air you are inhaling right now contains molecules that were exhaled by every person who ever lived. Not metaphorically, literally. The math is straightforward. There are approximately 10 to the power of 22 molecules in a single breath, and there are approximately 10 to the power of 44 molecules in the atmosphere. Every breath you take contains, on average, several molecules that pass through the lungs of Cleopatra, of Julius Caesar, of the nameless woman grinding grain in a sinking city on the edge of the delta. You are breathing their air. They are breathing through you. This is not mysticism. It is chemistry. It is the simple, verifiable, mathematically demonstrable fact that the material world is a closed system and everything in it is recycled. The iron in your blood was forged in the core of a dying star. The carbon in your muscles was synthesized in the nuclear furnaces of red giants that exploded before the sun was born. The water in your cells has been water for billions of years, cycling through oceans and clouds and glaciers and the bodies of dinosaurs and the roots of ancient forests and the tears of people whose names were never recorded. You are old, older than you feel, older than any story. The atoms in your body have been part of this planet since it formed, and they will be part of it long after the last human city, above water or below, has been forgotten. There is peace in that, not the peace of resignation, the peace of belonging. You are not a visitor here. You are not passing through. You are made of this place. You are made of its water and its iron and its carbon and its ancient, patient, endlessly recycling light. And consider this, the very act of listening to a story in the dark is itself ancient. It is older than writing, older than agriculture, older than the domestication of the dog, which was the first animal to sit beside a human at a fire and listen to the sound of a voice telling a tale. Storytelling is the original technology of human connection. It predates every tool, every institution, every system of governance or commerce. Before we built cities, before we planted crops, before we carved the first symbol into the first piece of bone, we told each other stories. We lay in the dark, in caves, under open skies, beside rivers that have since changed their courses, and we spoke, and we listened, and the listening bound us together in ways that no contract or constitution could replicate. You are doing that right now. You are participating in a practice that is at least 100,000 years old. The medium has changed from firelight to candlelight to electric light to the glow of a screen, but the act is the same. A voice in the dark, a story about people who are gone, a listener who is still here, still breathing, still connected by that breathing to every other listener who has ever drawn a breath and held it while someone told them what happened long ago. The fire has burned down to embers. The embers are warm. The warmth is enough. It has always been enough. A small circle of heat in a vast dark, shared between people who did not need to understand the universe to belong to it. The story is almost over now. The candle is burning low. The words are getting softer, slower, further apart. Thank you for being here. I mean that without performance, without the bright voice of someone selling you something. You gave your time tonight, the most irreplaceable thing you have, and you gave it to a story about a city at the bottom of the sea. That is a generous act. Not everyone would choose to spend their evening with the dead. Not everyone would care what happened to a harbor that sank before their grandparents' grandparents' grandparents were born. But you cared. You stayed. And the staying is the thing that matters. Heracleion does not need your attention. It has the sea. It has the silt. It has the slow company of eels and algae and the patient accumulation of time. But the people who live there, the woman with her grain, the fisherman with his net, the child with the broken clay horse, the priest with his bronze vessels of sacred oil, they benefit from being remembered. Not because remembering changes anything for them. They are gone. But because remembering changes something for you. It connects you to a lineage that extends beyond your own small window of years. It reminds you that you're not the first to worry, not the first to build on uncertain ground, not the first to watch the water rise and wonder what comes next. The water is still rising. It is rising in Abu Qir Bay, where the ruins of Heracleion lie under 6 meters of sea that will be 7 meters by the end of this century. It is rising in Jakarta and Venice and Miami and 100 other coastal cities whose names you know and 1,000 others whose names you do not. The curve of sea level rise is not linear. It is accelerating. The ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica are losing mass at rates that exceed even the most pessimistic models from a decade ago. The water is coming, not with malice, not with intent, just with the indifferent, inevitable physics of a warming planet. But that is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, the water is calm. Tonight, the ruins of Heracleion are doing what they have done every night for more than 1,000 years. They are being still. The granite columns are not resisting the water. The bronze vessels are not fighting the corrosion. The sealed jars are not struggling to preserve their contents. They are simply existing in the conditions they have been given, without complaint, without strategy, without the exhausting human habit of wishing things were otherwise. There is a lesson in that, not a preachy one, not a lesson that demands action or change, but a quiet one. A lesson that sits beside you like a friend who does not need to speak. Some things endure by holding on. Others endure by letting go. The city let go of the surface. The surface let go of the city. And in the letting go, something was preserved that holding on could never have protected. The stillness, the completeness, the strange perfection of a place that has stopped trying to be anything other than what it is. If you're still awake, your body is close to the threshold now. The boundary between waking and sleep is not a wall. It is a shoreline. The water comes up gradually, first around your ankles, then your knees, then your waist. You do not need to swim. You do not need to fight the current. You just let it rise. It is warm. It is familiar. Your body has crossed this shoreline every night of your life, and it knows the way even when your mind does not. Let the mind go. It has worked hard today. It has processed 10,000 inputs and made 100 decisions and carried the weight of being conscious in a world that demands constant vigilance. It has earned this rest. Let it set down its tools. Let it release its grip on the day. The day is over. It was enough. You were enough. Somewhere in Abu Qir Bay, the current is shifting. A thin stream of warmer water from the Nile's outflow is threading its way through the ruins, carrying particles of silt that will settle on the face of a statue and add one more invisible layer to the 1,200 years of layers already there. The process is slow. It is patient. It does not rush. It does not worry about deadlines or outcomes or whether it is doing enough. It simply deposits what it carries and moves on. You can do the same. Deposit the day. Set it down in the silt of memory where it will settle and compact and become, eventually, part of the sediment of your life. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to examine it. You do not need to judge whether it was a good day or a bad day. It was a day. It happened. And now it is joining all the other days, the thousands you have already lived, each one a thin layer in the coarse sample of your existence. The divers will not come for your layers. No magnetometer will map the shape of your buried years. But they are there. They are real. And they matter. Not because they will be studied, but because they were lived. The woman in Heracleion is sleeping now. Not in the story. In the real, physical sense. Her bones are at rest in the silt of the delta, surrounded by the dissolved remains of her house, her courtyard, her cooking hearth, her grinding stone. The goat is gone. The children grew up and had children of their own, and those children had children, and the chain continued, unbroken, across 100 generations, through the rise and fall of empires and the invention of technologies she could not have imagined, until it reached, improbably, impossibly, inevitably you. You are her future, the one she could not see from the edge of her sinking canal, the one she ground grain for without knowing it. Every meal she prepared, every wall she repaired, every fire she lit in the pre-dawn dark, all of it was, in a sense, for you. Not intentionally, not consciously, but functionally. She kept the chain intact. She passed the spark forward, and here you are, holding it. Hold it gently. It has come a long way. The channel is here whenever you need it. Whenever the night is long and the mind is restless and the world feels heavier than you can carry alone. There are more stories. There are always more stories. The drowned cities and the buried temples and the lost languages and the forgotten names. They are waiting. They are patient. They have been waiting for a long time, and they can wait a little longer. Close your eyes now. Let the water rise. Let the silt settle. Let the current carry you wherever it wants to go. Rest well. You are a descendant of survivors. And tomorrow, the story continues.